Ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Comma Rules Part 2. If you haven't already checked out Comma Rules Part 1, that video is available through Converge. And remember that a detailed list of all of the comma rules in both Parts 1 and Part 2 are available starting on page 576 in your textbook. So, picking up where we left off in Part 1, the next comma rule that we need to talk about is using commas to set off direct address. Direct address is when you are speaking directly to somebody using their name in a sentence. For example, in a sentence like this, "Gentlemen, keep your seats," the speaker is talking directly to the gentleman, so we need to add a comma here to separate what the speaker calls these people and what he says to them. Another example, "Car 54, where are you?" We're talking directly to car 54, so we're going to separate that with a comma. A final example, "Not now, Eleanor, I'm busy." Okay, so we're talking directly to Eleanor. We need to set off the opening remarks to her and what we say after her name with a comma on either side. Not using commas correctly with direct address can result in a problem like this. Instead of saying, "Let's eat, comma, grandma," we end up with this sentence here, "Let's eat, grandma," and that could be a pretty horrible situation. Use a comma correctly with direct address, and as the picture says, you could save lives. Next comma rule. Use commas to set off items in addresses and dates. You're probably pretty familiar with doing this when you are maybe writing an address on an envelope or a date on an assignment that you turn in. What we need to pay attention to is that when you write a date or an address in a sentence, you need to not only put a comma between, say, the city and the state here, Austin, Texas, but you also separate the last item in that date or address with a comma. So there's going to be one after whatever element you're talking about. Let's look at another example. "He found me on February 2nd, 1978 when I stopped in Fairbanks, Alaska to buy sunscreen." So I know when I write a date, I'm going to separate the day from the year with a comma. And then since this is the last item in that date, I put a comma after 1978. Same deal with Fairbanks, Alaska. I have to separate the city from the state with a comma, and then I have to put a comma after Alaska as well. The next rule says use commas to set off a degree or title following a name. So for example, if I have a person named John Doe MD in my sentence, which says he was audited when he reported only $5.68 in taxable income last year, I have to separate his name from his degree, and I have to also put a comma after his degree, just like with those dates and addresses. A second example, "The Neanderthal Award went to Samuel Lyle, PhD." I'm going to separate his name from his degree. Since that's at the end of the sentence, I obviously don't need a comma after that particular degree. The next rule that we'll look at is about using commas to set off dialogue from the speaker when you're writing with quotation marks. Like this, "Alexander announced, 'I don't think I want a second helping of possum.'" Okay, so here is what the dialogue is in the quotation marks. "I don't think I want a second helping of possum." I have to separate that from the narration with a comma, like so. There could be cases where you've got a sentence like this where we start with dialogue, we have narration in the middle, and then the dialogue continues, and I need commas to separate each of those. "Eat hearty, comma, said Marie, comma, because this is the last of the food." I hope that you notice that I put this comma before the quotation mark, and that is a typical rule when you're using commas with dialogue. It goes inside the quotation mark. This one just goes directly after that word, and then there's a space here before I start my new quotation mark. Next rule. Oh, I guess before we go on to our next rule, we need to have a note, a clarification that you don't need to use commas when you're quoting something indirectly. So, for example, I could say something like, "Bruce said that cockroaches have portions of their brain scattered throughout their bodies." The way that this is written is incorrect because I'm quoting indirectly. I'm not quoting exactly what Bruce said. I'm saying, hey, Bruce told me this. What would be correct is to write it like this, without a comma. Bruce said that cockroaches have portions of their brains scattered throughout their bodies. By the way, that's a terrifying piece of information about cockroaches that I'm not sure I needed to know. But in any case, if you're quoting something indirectly, leave that comma out. The next rule says use commas to set off yes, no, well, and other weak exclamations or interjections. So this is a type of introductory word or phrase like we talked about in part 1. Interjections are always set apart from the rest of a sentence by either a comma or an exclamation point. If it's a weak exclamation, then use a comma instead of an exclamation point. Like this, yes, I am in the cat condo business. I'm going to separate yes from the rest of the sentence. Another example, no, all the units with decks are sold. Put a comma after no. Well, perhaps one with a pool will do. Again, there's that word well, a weak exclamation, so I'm going to put a comma after that word. Then we'll look at using commas to set off interrupters or parenthetical elements appearing in the middle of a sentence. Parenthetical element, as explained by your book, is additional information placed as explanation or comment within an already complete sentence. So, if the sentence makes sense when you take this parenthetical element out of it, then separate it with commas. Here's an example. Jack is, I think, still a compulsive gambler. If I got rid of the words I think, the sentence would say, Jack is still a compulsive gambler, and it would still make complete sense. So I know I've got to separate that parenthetical element with commas on either side, like so. Second example. Harvey, my brother, sometimes has breakfast with him. In this particular example, the parenthetical is a non-essential element like we talked about in part 1. The sentence makes sense without it. Harvey sometimes has breakfast with him, so I'm going to separate that with commas on either side. And then a final example. Jack cannot, for example, resist shuffling the toast or dealing the pancakes. For example doesn't need to be in that sentence for it to make sense, so separate it with commas on either side. And that's the last of the comma rules that we will talk about with this video. Thanks for watching.